So when it comes to setting up a tarp that I plan to sleep underneath of it, whether that's on the ground or in a hammock, I do it a little bit differently than if I were to just set up a tarp for eating or cooking underneath of. The biggest concern, or biggest thing that I'm thinking about when it comes to my sleeping tarp is drainage. I don't want to have to wake up in the middle of the night multiple times to kind of push water off of the tarp. I want something that's going to drain rain, drain water or snow off of the tarp consistently throughout the night without me having to deal with it. I also want a little bit more of an enclosed space and some protection. I don't need the tarp to be touching the ground. I don't need to be completely around me. I do want it to be up and have some ventilation, but I do want to be able to block wind from one or two sides depending on where I'm positioning the tarp. So when it comes to trying to figure out where you're going to set up the tarp, you want to think about a good spot to sleep, something that's not going to pool with water if it happens to rain, and an area that's going to be relatively flat and comfortable for you to sleep under. You can kind of remove sticks and branches and that type of thing from there. Now when it comes to setting up the tarp, you want to have trees in the appropriate spot. So I like to have one tree where I plan on having my head, and I like to have another tree where I'm going to have my feet. And so what I'm going to do here is my very first rope. And this is different than when I just set up a tarp for eating or cooking under. I use a ridge line. And a ridge line is a single piece of rope that's going to go from one tree to another, and we're going to drape the tarp over top of it. Now, when I set up a sleeping tarp, I end up using a lot more rope than if I'm just going to have a regular kind of cooking or eating shelter. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my rope around kind of my head or my foot tree, and I'm going to tie one end using the bowline. And if you're not familiar with the bowline, check out the bowline video. There'll be a link just below this video on how to do that knot. Now I'm going to take this rope and I'm going to go all the way down to this tree over here. And this is where I'm going to tie in a trucker's hitch. And if you're unfamiliar with the trucker's hitch, there'll be another video link below this video showing you how to do the trucker's hitch. You want to pull this nice and tight. And here's the advantage of that trucker's hitch. You can really crank this down and get it nice and tight. There we go. So now that I've got my ridge line, the next thing that I'm going to do is drape my tarp over top of that, making sure that I do it lengthwise. All right, now that I've got my tarp draped over the ridge line, the next thing that I'm going to do is secure the ends lengthwise. So there should be a loop or some sort of a grommet right here on the tarp. I'm going to tie off a rope there, and then I'm going to tension it to the tree, and I'm going to do the same thing down on the other end over there. So for this grommet right here, I'm going to do a bowline once again. And then instead of bringing this rope around the tree, because this is where I did my bowline on my ridge line, I'm actually just going to throw my rope around that. I won't be able to do this on the other side because I've got a trucker's hitch over there, but this will work here. And I'm going to do a trucker's hitch to that. So then I'm going to the other side, and once again, a bowline in here. And all the way to that other tree that I tied off to. I'm going to go around that. And a trucker's hitch right here. Now I can pull tension on this as well. So then the next thing here is to pull out each of my corners. And I have some options when it comes to this. I can take a nice big long piece of line and pull this out to a tree wherever I have a tree. I can also peg this down. I want to use a rope. I don't want to have the tarp right on the ground. I do want some ventilation, some air being able to circulate underneath the tarp. That way you don't get wet from condensation. But you can use pegs or you can use rocks, whatever you have. It's going to depend on where you're actually sleeping or camping. And then the other thing that I want to consider is, where do I think the wind is going to come from? So where I am right now, and just knowing this area well enough, I know that any type of bad weather is going to come from the south of me. And so I want to have the other side of this shelter dropped much lower than the side that I'm standing on right over here. And so I'm going to actually focus on tarping down or pegging down that side first. So once again, you guessed it, the bow line right here on the corner. And if you didn't get that guess right, well, you'd get this one right, because here's the trucker's hitch right over here. Really just kind of using two main knots for most of the work that I do on tarps, the bow line and that trucker's hitch. So the big reason why I love using this ridge line is if I need to make adjustments on this tarp, if I need to move it more that way, or I need to bring it in this way, or I need to move it side to side, all I need to do is go in where I have those trucker's hitches and make those adjustments. Let's say if my wind kind of starts coming in on one direction, well, I can drop that side down. I can do that any number of ways as well. I can use a large object, like a log of some sort. I can bring this log and I can even just throw that down just to lower that end a little bit more. I could do the same thing over here. I could also have a shorter line that kind of pegs down into the ground like that, and it just provides a little bit more wind protection. So there we go. So the perfect height for me is where I can just sit up underneath of it and my head doesn't touch the inside of the tarp. Too low, and I find there's just too much condensation buildup inside the tarp and you end up getting wet. One of the advantages of sleeping under a tarp, as opposed to sleeping in a tent, is that you don't get that condensation buildup, which is really nice. Now, if I was going to have a hammock underneath this, I'd want this raised a little bit more. So make sure you comment and like this video. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe so you can get more of these videos into your feed. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, feel free to get a hold of me. You can comment. You can send me an email. You can reach out to me on Instagram, Twitter, as well as Facebook. And most importantly of all, happy trails. Stay safe out there.